Hey, you're here. That's perfect. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? And what time is it right now? Midnight? 2 a.m.? I'm your storyteller tonight, and what you're about to hear isn't just a tale. It's something someone truly lived. Something they still can't shake off. But don't worry, you're safe here. My voice, this moment, and these stories are here to help you drift off slowly, gently into a deeper sleep. So, take a deep breath. Get comfortable. Relax. If you enjoy this kind of storytelling, give it a like and hit subscribe. I'll be here, night after night. Now close your eyes, if you'd like, and let the story begin. This happened over the course of 3 or 4 years when I was a kid. I can't remember exactly when I got the first one, but I started having this recurring half-lucid nightmare maybe once every couple of months, from what I can remember. Here's how it would go. I'd be lying down in bed, only the view wasn't from my first-person perspective. Instead, I'd be looking down at myself from the ceiling like I was viewing my own bedroom through a security camera feed. The out-of-body dissociation always freaked me out. I tried to float or swim towards my body, but I was never able to move beyond swiveling my head to look around the room. I was half lucid, so I knew it was a dream, but that didn't make me any less scared. After calming myself down, I'd start noticing strange things about my bedroom. For one, the digital clock on my nightstand would always be counting in reverse. That was typically the first strange detail I'd notice. And once I noticed that, I'd start seeing other weird stuff. There were these drawings taped to random spots on the walls and dresser, like crayon drawings you'd expect from a kid my age, but I had no memory of ever making them. I wasn't the type of kid who ever drew much, so it wasn't like I had just forgotten about them. They always showed the same thing. A row of people holding hands, all smiling, with one smaller figure who I can only imagine was me. They were always standing in front of a house with a blue roof, but I can't remember much more about the drawings than that. The other detail about the dreams that still sticks out to me is an old toy train of mine that was always sitting in a different spot on my bedroom floor, which was significant because I had lost that particular toy years prior. Anyway, after analyzing my room for a bit, I'd get this unexplainable urge to look out my bedroom window. I'd glance over, and as if it were on cue, a man would appear just a few inches from the glass. Had short gray hair and what looked like a cut on his left temple. That's honestly all I can remember about his face. He would watch me sleep for a few seconds, then start clawing at the window like he was trying to open it from the outside. That's usually when I woke up. Sometimes I immediately ran to the window, and sometimes I was too terrified to even move. But I always ended up checking one way or another. I don't know what I thought I'd find, maybe claw marks or a smudge from where his hand had been, but there was never anything there, or anyone for that matter. After the 4th time it happened, I finally told my parents. My mom told me that recurring dreams weren't that rare, especially at my age, and my dad chimed in to remind me that they were always just one room away. If I ever felt scared, I nodded and acted like that helped, but it didn't. Not really. My dad could tell I was still scared, so he took me by the hand and explored the exterior of the house with me. There was no indication that anyone had been there. No footprints, no smudges on the window, nothing. Even so, that didn't calm my nerves as much as you might think. Keep in mind, this was about 1 year in, so I was having this dream roughly once every 3 months. It wasn't happening every night, not even close, but having the exact same dream 4 times definitely means something, which I knew even at that age. But after that 4th dream, though, they just stopped for a while, at least. Went nearly 6 months without a single episode, and at some point, I let myself believe it was over. It all just kind of faded into the backgrounds, the way childhood fears tend to when life gets more normal. But then it came back. I have no idea what. triggered it. But one random night, I had the dream again. Everything was exactly the same as I remembered. The clock, the drawings, the train, everything. But there was something different about that dream. It was scaring me twice as much as the earlier ones had. I couldn't figure out what it was. Everything was following the exact same chain of events. But then, as I was looking around the room, I realized what it was. My bedroom window was open. As soon as I saw that, I woke up. There was a period of maybe 5 minutes where I couldn't move. Complete and utter sleep paralysis. And it wasn't a passive sleep paralysis either. My brain was screaming at me to check the window the entire time, but I couldn't drag myself out of bed no matter how much I tried. On top of that, I felt significantly colder, as if cold air was blowing through my bedroom window, which I was convinced was wide open. Those 5 minutes were unlike any kind of fear I have ever experienced. All I could think about was how that man was moments away from climbing through my window, yet there was nothing I could do about it. When I finally regained control of my limbs, I forced myself over to the window, confirming that it was locked. I couldn't fall back asleep that night. I was too scared. I'm not sure how I was even able to function the following morning. Another couple of months went by, but I wasn't going to be fooled again. Every night before I went to bed, I thought long and hard about the dream in an attempt to brace myself for having it again. I'm not sure if this logic tracks, but I was hoping that keeping the dream on my brain would help me not get too scared should I have it again. To my surprise, that technique actually worked the next time I had that dream. I wasn't even half as scared. I didn't even bother checking the window after waking up. By the time I had it again, I was barely scared at all. Still, something about it lingered. Not in a scary way, but enough to make me want to bring it up to my parents again. Maybe it was the way I explained it, or maybe it was because I was slightly older, but for whatever reason they actually paid closer attention. This time I tried to provide as much detail as possible, something I hadn't done before. As I was getting to my description of the man, my parents' demeanor shifted. Not too dramatically, but enough for me to notice. Specifically, it was right as I was telling them about the cut on his forehead. Before I could even finish, my dad cut me off and asked if I was sure about the cut. I told him I was, and he looked over at my mom like there was some unspoken detail that I wasn't aware of. I asked my parents what was going on, and they assured me that everything was fine. Not wanting to upset them, I didn't inquire further. But from that point on, I started wondering if there was more to the story. As it would turn out, a few days after that conversation, my parents sat me down and came clean. It wasn't some dramatic reveal or anything. They just said there was something they wanted to tell me. My mom did most of the talking. Apparently, when I was really little, like too young to even remember, there was a man named Brian who used to watch me sometimes. They always referred to him as Uncle Brian, but he wasn't actually family, just a close friend of my dad's from college. I guess he was around a lot when I was a baby and a toddler, especially during the times when both my parents were working full-time. But something happened. My dad didn't give details, just said that there was a falling out between them bad enough that they completely cut ties. He said he forbade Brian from ever coming near our family again, specifically from coming near me again. That was the end of it. I asked what caused the fallout, but they wouldn't tell me. They just repeated that it had nothing to do with me and that I didn't need to worry. The only other thing they told me, and this is what gave me a sick feeling, was that Brian had a noticeable scar on his forehead from a car accident he'd been in years before I was born. They didn't connect the dots out loud, but they didn't have to. I was old enough to make the connection myself. Later that night, after my mom had gone to bed, my dad lingered in the living room with me a little longer. I could tell he wanted to say more, like he hadn't been totally satisfied with how the conversation went. Earlier, after a few moments of silence, he told me his theory. He said he thought the dreams were my brain's way processing something buried, really deep. Some memory from when I was little before I could even form full sentences. He mentioned how close I apparently used to be with Brian, how I'd cry when he left the house, how I always wanted him to be the one to read me to sleep. My dad said he couldn't think of any other way. I'd know about the scar on Brian's forehead. I didn't know what to make of that. I had no recollection of this Brian person whatsoever. Even now, I still can't recall a single memory with him in it. I had no choice but to move on with my life, though. Recurring dream, or not another handful of months passed. I'm doing my best to describe the timeline as accurately as possible, but it's hard to remember exactly how much time passed in between each dream. That said, the frequency decreased after talking to my parents. I had the dream only once or maybe twice within the next year, but things took a very dark turn sometime in year 4. One night, after waking up from the dream, I glanced over at my window, just out of habit, and this time, I actually saw something move. It was just a flicker, but I was 100% sure something had just moved from right outside my window. And just like that, all the fear I had spent years trying to prevent came rushing back. It was actually worse. I jumped out of bed and screamed for my parents, who took me very seriously. My dad sprinted outside in his bare feet while my mom held me tightly. Eventually, my dad came back and started whispering stuff to my mom. They told me to stay put while they called the police. I listened to them and stayed in their room, although I don't remember ever hearing any sirens or other voices besides theirs. That night, my dad houses. It was 2019 when this happened. I remember specifically because it was the year I was living on my own in Asheville, North Carolina. I moved here for a temporary job, and it was an excuse for me to live on my own for the first time. I was 22 years old and just out of college. I had an apartment in downtown. I could walk to most things I needed, but I also had my car for when I wanted to branch out or venture out of town. The thing I loved about Asheville and North Carolina in general was the sheer amount of hiking trails. I'd been to many around town, but one I hadn't been to was DuPont State Forest. One day, I decided to go. The drive was just under an hour from Asheville. It was a random Wednesday in October. The leaves were starting to change, and it was the perfect time for a hike. I didn't have work that day, and it'd be a work day for everyone else. It meant I'd probably have the trails all to myself. I got to the parking area for the park, and I found where one of the trails began. I walked for a while, and the trail was serene. I was the only one out there that day. It was a cloudy day, and we'd been getting a lot of rain that week, which was more of a reason I wanted to go, because the trail would lead to some nice waterfalls called Triple Falls and High Falls, and the waterfalls would be more impressive after a few days of rainfall. I only had to hike about 4 miles before getting to the Triple Falls, which was a really cool sight. A little piece of trivia: a scene in the Hunger Games was filmed at this waterfall. I took a few videos and pictures as I sat on a rock for a bit. I noticed a woman in the woods on the trail. She was looking at me. I waved at her, trying to be polite. Then she just turned around and slowly walked deeper into the woods until she was out of sight. Not really something I gave a second thought to anyway. I wasn't tired yet. I had literally just started hiking, so I didn't sit for too long. I got up and headed back to the trail. I didn't want to try climbing the rocks of the waterfall because they were incredibly slippery. I continued to ascend up the trail and eventually came to the higher point of the falls called High Falls. I took a few more videos and pictures here and sat on another dry rock for a bit. I swear, I felt the sense of deja vu when I saw that woman again in the woods by the trail. Once again, she was staring me down. I didn't wave this time. I instead looked down at my phone, pretending not to notice or care. I couldn't help but glance up after like 10 seconds, and now she was gone. If I had to guess, the woman was like 55. She had short grayish blonde hair from the looks of it. But again, she was pretty far away. so this was all just what I saw of her from a distance. I didn't see which way she went, but whatever way it was, I wanted to go the opposite. I kept walking the direction I'd been walking, and eventually came to another landmark of the trail, a covered bridge. I once again stopped here to take a scenic video and a few photos. I drank a bit of my water and then looked at the end of the bridge from the side I had just walked from. I saw that woman, I swear. I didn't see her there before I started taking videos and pictures. I also didn't hear anyone walking behind me. She was once again staring right at me, as if I were doing something wrong. I was getting annoyed. I started walking over to her and said, "Excuse me," but she just turned around and started walking away. Actually, the speed at which she was walking away for someone at her age was unsettling. I almost felt concerned at the possibility that she may have been somebody with special needs that needed help, but I didn't convince myself to go chasing after her. I just leaned on the edge of the bridge for a few minutes before deciding to turn back. I had already been hiking for about 45 minutes, and it would take another 45 to get back down to the car, walking back down the trail. I came in the direction that woman had gone. I passed a younger woman and walking her dog, so I decided to stop her and ask if she'd seen an older woman pass by. She said no, and just trying to make conversation about it. Talk to somebody about it. I told her how I kept seeing that woman popping out of nowhere and looking at me, then just walking off. She laughed and said that's really strange. I didn't want to take up too much of her time, so after we both shared a laugh about it, I continued on my way the entire way down the trail. I grew a bit paranoid that I'd see that woman lurking around in the background somewhere again, but all was quiet. On the way down, I passed one other person who gave me a friendly smile and a nod. Other than that, I made it back to my car, undisturbed. Later that day, I went on a date with a girl I was seeing there. We went to our favorite local bar to get some pumpkin spice beers and watch baseball. I told her about the woman on the trail, and she found it amusing because, honestly, it did sound funny after that. I went home. Fast forward to that night when I was in bed. I hardly ever wake up. In the middle of the night, I'm a pretty heavy sleeper normally, so me waking up in the middle of the night in the dark was unusual. I was still coming to when I heard something at the foot of my bed. I looked up and saw the figure of a woman at the foot of my bed. I felt as though my insides had just fallen out of my body. I started screaming so loud that I'm sure my neighbors could have heard it even with the windows closed. I started crawling against my headboard, trying to distance myself as much as possible from the female figure at the foot of my bed. Then she just turned and walked out of the room. I stopped screaming now, more so trying to just catch my breath and slow my rapidly beating heart. I flicked on the lamp and started shouting, "Who's there?" I listened, but there was dead silence. I grabbed the knife I had in the nightstand next to my bed and jumped out of bed. I flicked on every light switch I passed until the entire apartment was lit up. There was no one there, not in the closet, not behind a couch, not under any beds. And so I called my father. I didn't know what else to do. I needed to share what just happened with somebody. My father, groggy, picked up the phone, and after explaining to him, he said I must have hallucinated it while I was still in my half-asleep state. He said I wasn't fully awake yet, and so I could have been seeing things I knew deep down. He was probably right, but it didn't make the image I saw any less real-looking or horrifying. And then I told him about the woman in the park and how the figure at my bed actually resembled her. He said, if anything, that further proves his point, that my brain conjured up a familiar image from earlier. That day, somehow, I went back to sleep that night with my bedroom door barricaded with my dresser, just in case. It wasn't until 2 days later that I heard from my mom that her sister in Germany died. I'd never met my aunt. She'd been basically estranged from my mom, as she hadn't left Germany in over 25 years. My mom and uncle flew to Germany to attend the funeral, and it wasn't until she got back home and I saw the prayer card with my aunt's face on it, that once again, I felt like my organs dropped out of my body when I realized she looked identical to the woman I saw on the trail that day and hallucinated at the foot of my bed. This story shook my whole family, especially because I told my dad about all of it, and the hallucination before we even got news of my aunt's passing. I was born a Catholic, but never found myself to be super religious after confirmation. But go damn, does this really send shivers down my spine and make me question what exactly I believe? Story: every Easter, my entire extended family takes the trip out to my uncle John's house, who lives way out in the sticks. This past year was no different. Uncle John lives in a huge house that sits on a wide open stretch of land which is surrounded by woods on all sides. Even though I've been there before many times, actually, I've never actually wandered out in the woods behind his house before. I'm not much of a nature person, so I've never had much of an interest in the outdoors. I was dreading the trip, to tell you the truth. I've never really related much to that side of my family. They're all super outdoorsy, into hunting and fishing and stuff like that, and most of them have lived in the same place their whole lives. Anytime I'm around them, I feel kind of like the odd one out. On top of that, most of my cousins are way older than me, like already married with kids, or working on some kind of farm. The only one even remotely close to my age is Kevin. He's a couple years older than me, and actually pretty chill. We always end up sticking together during these family trips. Just by default, he knows I don't really fit in with the rest of them, so he's usually good about keeping me company without making it weird. Anyway, we made the drive to Uncle John's late Friday night. I'm an only child, so it was just my parents and I in the car. I was exhausted from the drive, so I went to bed almost immediately the next morning. Kevin and I spent a couple hours in Uncle John's basement playing pool table. Neither of us was any good, but it was better than sitting around upstairs. The house was already packed with relatives. By then you know what the usual holiday chaos is like. We mostly stayed downstairs low-key. Avoiding it all, there wasn't a TV down there, so Kevin played some music off his phone, and the two of us talked about some dumb family drama, not even worth mentioning here. While we played, Kevin kept going on about the woods behind Uncle John's house. He said they stretched out for miles, and that hardly anyone ever went far enough to see the cool stuff out there. He talked about how magical it felt, and how beautiful the isolation was. I mostly just nodded along. Nature talk wasn't really my thing, but he clearly loved it. I'm not sure how, but later that day, Kevin convinced me to go on a nature walk with him. Like I said, I'm not a nature person by any means, but I was quite literally dying of boredom, which is probably why I agreed to tag along. We obviously told Uncle John where we were going. He's a really nice guy and always lets us younger people do what we want. A mentality I wish my own parents shared. Kevin took the lead. Once we got outside, cutting across the backyard and into the tree line like he'd done it 100 times before, which, knowing him, he probably had. The woods were thick, but not totally wild. There was a kind of natural path that Kevin was following. It wasn't late in the day, so I wasn't super worried about the sun setting, but the deeper we went, the more I started to wonder how we were going to find our way back. After about 20 minutes of walking, I asked Kevin if he was sure he knew where we were, and he just laughed. He told me he knew these woods like the back of his hand, and that he'd been exploring them since he was a kid. We'd been walking for maybe another 20 minutes when we both stopped at the same time. From somewhere up ahead, we heard this loud thunk, like something heavy slamming into wood. It didn't sound like an animal or someone stepping on a branch. It was reoccurring, like a pause, then another hit, then another pause, and another hit. It sounded like a hammer or mallet being driven against a tree. That's the best way I can describe it. Kevin looked at me, and I could tell he was trying to figure it out too. That sound didn't sound too close, but it was loud enough to be clear. He told me it wasn't out of the realm of possibility that a hunter was wandering around in there. But even so, he definitely looked a little startled eventually. The sound stopped. I asked if he wanted to turn back, but he shook his head. I could tell. He was curious now, and I'll admit, I was kind of too. So we kept walking in the direction we thought the sound had come from, both on high alert. We'd only been walking for a few more minutes when Kevin suddenly stopped and held his arm out in front of me. I froze, thinking maybe he'd seen someone in front of us, but then he pointed up into the trees at first. I didn't understand what I was seeing, but then it hit me. There were 3 upside-down crosses nailed into 3 adjacent trees, way higher up than anyone could have reached without a ladder, easily 15, maybe 20 feet off the ground before we could even turn to leave. I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. I whipped my head around, and to my horror, there was a person standing. There he was, dressed like a lumberjack, with a thick beard and a very dark stare. Kevin stepped in front of me, partially shielding me from the guy's view. He stared at me specifically and said, "You shouldn't be here." Kevin immediately apologized to the guy and told him we were just leaving, which is actually what we did. The guy didn't move as we left. He just stared us down as we walked back. The way we had come, I could feel my hands shaking. We walked back, the whole way in silence, and I've never experienced a more tense moment in my life. The 2 of us kept turning around, trying to make sure we weren't being followed, but there was no way to tell for sure when we finally made it back to the house. We told Uncle John first thing, like I said. He's a friendly guy, and he knows all his neighbors, so I got a sick feeling in my stomach when he said no one he knew matched our description of the guy in the woods. He asked us a bunch of times if we had been followed, and we told him no. There wasn't much else for any of us to do. Someone floated the idea of arming up and sweeping the woods, but Uncle John wanted to avoid confrontation and didn't want to lead anyone to his house, so Kevin and I went back downstairs to chill, and the rest of our relatives went back to whatever they'd been doing, likely planning for the Easter festivities. That whole encounter messed with my head way more than I let on. I ended up going to bed pretty early that night, just to get my mind off of it. But because of that, I woke up way earlier than usual, like way earlier. I rolled over, checked my phone, and saw that it was just after 5 o'clock a.m. The sun had just barely started poking over the horizon, but it was still mostly dark out. I tried to go back to sleep, but I couldn't, so I just decided to get an early start to my day. Uncle John has a study on the 3rd floor of his house, so I decided to go up there and see if there were any interesting books to read. Uncle John's study has this big old window that overlooks the entire backyard. I walked past it. Something caught my eye. There was a very faint flickering glow coming from the edge of the woods. It looked like the pulsing light of a small fire, not a flashlight or anything that bright. I stood there for a good 30 seconds just staring at it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Curiosity got the better of me, and I needed to know what I was looking at. So I went downstairs and stepped out onto the back deck. When I realized what I was looking at, I had to literally fight back a scream. There were at least 3 figures standing just past the edge of the woods, each holding a small torch. They weren't walking or moving around. They were just standing there, facing the house, facing me. I ran straight to Uncle John's room and woke him up, telling him what I saw. Without any questions, he grabbed his rifle, threw on a pair of pants, and told me to stay inside. He marched out onto the back deck and scanned the yard while I watched from the doorway. By that time, though, those people had retreated back into the woods. Without hesitation, he aimed his rifle up into the air and fired it 3 times. That woke up the whole house, and the next 20 minutes or so was complete chaos. I'll just tell you that I can't think of a worse way to spend an Easter morning. The whole holiday was kind of ruined after that, and everyone was on edge for the entire day. Eventually, it came time for my parents and I to leave, and I can't say I was upset about it. This was like 9 months ago, and Uncle John has since told us that he hasn't seen or experienced anything strange. Still, though, I would hate to be living in that house, knowing there are psychos lurking somewhere nearby. I'll send an update should Uncle John tell us anything of note. I just graduated high school last year, which is when what I'm about to tell you took place. Easter has always been a fun time of the year for my friends and I, but not for the reason you think we've outgrown those childish Easter egg hunts that everyone does when they're little, and I honestly cringe when my parents make me participate in one with my younger cousins. A few years ago, I can't remember exactly when my friends and I created a fun twist on the typical egg hunt format and devised. Our own game is not really that special. It's basically just a mashup of manhunts and an N. Easter egg hunt, it's two teams like manhunts, but the seekers are also responsible for hiding and protecting. A few eggs if the hiders manage to capture all. The eggs they win, and if the seekers don't find all the hiders within a certain time frame, the hiders also win. There are some other dumb rules like how the seekers can't be camping where any of the eggs are hidden, and stuff like that. But that's not super relevant to the story. It was the Thursday before Easter and school was canceled the next day, for whatever reason. So we decided to have a sleepover that night. It was me, Jake, Race, Chuck, Arthur, and Raz. Raz wasn't actually his real name. His last name was Razzie, but everyone just called him Raz. His family had the biggest house by far, so he'd always chill there. He lived in the middle of nowhere, and his backyard bordered a decently sized wooded area. Plus, his parents were out of town until Friday night, so we'd have the place to ourselves. We were just chilling playing video games in his basement when Chuck suggested we play manhunt. We were all down, so we rounded up whatever flashlights Raz had in his garage. We used a random number generator on Jake's phone to pick random teams, just to keep it fair and unpredictable. I was on a team with Chuck, and Raz and we were seeking Jake, and Arthur were hiding Raz's mom. Had a ton of plastic eggs upstairs, so we grabbed a couple of them, and all of us went outside. We'd played back there a bunch of times before, so we already knew the layout. The far boundary was the fence line, and the other edges were the creek and the back slope that ran down towards Raz's neighbor's horse pasture. We set timers on our phones to give the hiders enough time to hide, and us time to hide our eggs. Once 10 minutes passed, the game had officially begun. I should also mention that the sun had already gone down, but it wasn't completely dark out yet. Once the timer went off, we all split up to cover more ground. I veered left into a thicker patch of trees, while Raz and Chuck went the other way. I kept my hand over my flashlight, just skimming the ground every few steps so that I wouldn't trip, but I mostly relied on the moonlight to see. The game was way more fun when you actually felt like you were sneaking around, and besides, if one of the hiders saw a flashlight beam coming toward them, they just book it a few minutes in. I thought I saw something move 20 or 30 feet in front of me at first. I couldn't tell if I was imagining it, but then I saw it again. I instantly turned my flashlight off in frozen place. Someone was crouching behind a tree up ahead. Whoever it was must not have seen me, otherwise they'd definitely have run off. They weren't moving like they were trying to stay perfectly still. My first guess was that it was Race. He always picked spots close to the seekers, thinking no one would expect it. I decided to try to get the jump on him. I crouched down a bit myself and started moving slowly, trying to circle around behind him. When I got close enough, I sprang forward and lunged at whoever was crouching there, tapping him hard on the shoulder and yelling, "Gotcha!" But the second he turned it around, I felt a wave of fear wash over me. It wasn't any of my friends. It was a grown man with slicked back hair and these wide open eyes like he was on drugs. His clothes were all torn up, and he smelled awful. I was so taken back that I didn't even realize what was going on before I could react. He tackled me to the ground. I screamed as I hit the dirt, but before I could yell out again, his hands were around my throat. He was pressing down with all his weight, and in that moment, I honestly thought my life was over. I couldn't breathe, and I didn't have the strength to overpower him from that position. and then out of nowhere, he stopped out of the corner of my eye. I saw a flashlight beam bouncing off the trees. Somewhere behind us, one of my friends must have been running towards us. The guy must have seen the light too, because he jumped off without saying a word and straight up ran into the woods, disappearing almost immediately. I just laid there gasping for air, still too stunned to move. A few seconds later, Chuck reached me, helped me up, and said he saw the whole thing. I wanted to chase after that guy, but Chuck told me that was an awful idea. So the two of us instead ran back towards the house. Chuck called the rest of the crew and told everyone to go back to Raz's house immediately. Once we all reconvened, I told everyone what happened after. Chuck filled in the rest of the gaps. Everyone started talking over each other, but then Arthur said something that shut all of us up. He said that before the game even started, meaning before the initial 10 minutes were up, he saw two people walking through the trees near where he was hiding. He said they were moving slowly, like they were scouting or waiting for something, and he'd actually gotten pissed at the time because he thought it was two of the Seekers teaming up and breaking the rules. That's when me, Chuck, and Raz all looked at each other and immediately shook our heads. None of us had been walking together, and there was no way we could have gotten all the way to their side in such a short time frame anyway. The realization hit us all at once. If it wasn't any of us, then there were at least 3 other people out in those woods that night, one who attacked me, and 2 more who were moving around before the game had even started. In that moment, I realized how smart I had been for listening to Chuck and not chasing after my attacker. He might have saved me from walking head first into an ambush. I told everyone we needed to call the cops. I mean, I had literally been attacked, but the second I said it, Raz cut me off. He got weirdly serious and said, "No, we're not calling anyone." I asked him what in the world he was talking about, and he said he was technically grounded, and beyond that, he wasn't allowed to host anyone while his parents were out of town, so involving the cops would get him in serious hot water. I told him this was a serious situation and worth involving the police, but he didn't budge. The rest of the guys were kind of stuck in the middle. No one wanted to put Raz in a bad spot with his parents, but I could tell that they were all having a hard time, just pretending that the whole thing didn't happen. Eventually, I caved and agreed to not call the police and try to just enjoy the rest of the night. But I was seriously shaken. I ended up going to bed early that night and left Raz's house the next morning before anyone else was awake. This might surprise some of you, but I actually wasn't too affected by this experience. I'm very much of the mentality that things happen and people have to move on. So that's what I did anyway. About a week after everything went down, Raz told us all that he felt bad just leaving those Easter eggs out in the woods, so he had gone to collect them. Even though he was scared out of his mind, we all got a good laugh out of that, but his comment made me think back to that night and contemplate my life a little. I have no idea what those men were doing in those woods that night, but I can confidently say that I won't be spending the night at Raz's place anytime soon. Anyway, I'm at college now, and I'm far, far away from Raz's backyard, but being as Easter is coming up next month, I got reminded of this. This happened when I was a little kid, maybe 6 or 7. My family has always been very religious, so Easter has always been a huge deal for us. Same with most of the other major religious holidays. Now that I think of it, even Sunday kind of felt like its own holiday with the way my parents treated church. It's actually kind of funny. Some of my earliest memories are church-related. What I'm about to tell you was one of them. It was Easter Sunday, so all the services are much longer than usual. I don't mind, though. My parents instilled the love of Christ in me very early on. After the service was Sunday school, or CCD as our church called it. I know lots of churches don't offer Sunday school after really important masses, but ours did. So after the mass, my parents took me downstairs to all the classrooms, like they had done 100 times, and I said goodbye. I'm just going to describe the layout of the church. Now, so this story makes sense. Our church had kind of a split-level layout. The main sanctuary was upstairs, where the altar and pews were, and then all the classrooms were in. The basement, it was technically a basement, but the church was on a slope. You could still get in and out of the building from down there. There was this long carpeted hallway down there, with maybe 7 or 8 rooms branching off on each side, grouped by age. My classroom was one of the first ones on the left. At the very end of the hallway were the 2 bathrooms, one for boys and one for girls. Right next to those was a heavy gray door that led outside. It was almost always locked from the inside, but I remember being told it could be used in case of an emergency. The adults always warned us to never leave from that door because it would automatically lock behind us and we'd have no way of getting back inside the church. But anyway, back to the story. The whole downstairs had been decorated for Easter, like really decorated. The walls were covered in pastel streamers and little paper cutouts of lambs and crosses, and there were drawings of Jesus with kids taped up between the classroom doors. Some of the teachers had even worn these cheap bunny ears you get at CVS. It actually felt more festive down there than it had upstairs during Mass. All the kids were in a good mood too, probably because everyone knew there'd be egg hunts later in the day. Normally, I'd wait until class was over to go to the bathroom, but because the Easter service had run way longer than usual Masses, and I couldn't hold it, I raised my hand and asked to go, and the teacher excused me from the room. The bathrooms were maybe 15 feet down the hall, and it wasn't uncommon for kids to go by themselves. They always said if we took too long, they'd come check, but I don't remember that ever actually happening, so I slipped out quietly while the rest of the class was coloring pictures of the empty tomb and Jesus rising from it. I went into the boys' bathroom and shut the stall door behind me. It was quiet, but those bathrooms were old. All I could hear was the soft hum of the fluorescent lights and the faint sound of a teacher's voice echoing down the hallway. But as I was sitting there, I suddenly heard this weird scraping sound coming from the stall next to mine. It didn't sound like anything normal, not like someone shifting or unlocking a door. It was the slow, uneven metal sound, like something was being dragged or scraped against the inside of the door. Not loud, but sharp. I don't remember being scared. I was mostly just confused at first. I thought it was another kid, so I kept quiet and finished up my business. As I was washing my hands, though, I looked into the mirror and saw that stall door opening slowly, but instead of another kid stepping out, it was a grown man wearing an Easter bunny costume. I remember the way the ears flopped forward a little and how the suit looked off. It was kind of saggy and stained in places like it hadn't been washed. The fur was more of a grayish white than a bright white, and one of the eyes on the head looked like it had been sewn back on crooked. But the thing is, I don't remember being scared when I saw him. Not then. Like I said, I was pretty young, and in my mind, this was just the Easter bunny making a surprise visit. I actually smiled when I turned around. I think I even said something like, "Hi." He didn't say anything at first, just stood there halfway out of the stall, staring at me. His head was tilted slightly, and he didn't move. I remember feeling a little awkward, like I wasn't sure if I was supposed to say something else. Then after a long pause, he stepped all the way out and slowly raised one of his arms, pointing towards the door, like he was guiding me out. That's when he finally spoke. His voice was muffled behind the costume, but I still remember the exact words he said. "You're the lucky chosen child. I have a gift for you outside." I didn't even hesitate. I was excited, like genuinely thrilled at the idea that I'd been picked for some kind of special Easter surprise. I think the fact that this was happening in my church gave me a false sense of security or something. I pushed open the big gray door without thinking twice, not even remembering that it was supposed to stay locked. The Easter bunny followed right behind, not saying anything else. He started walking across the pavement toward the far corner of the church parking lot. There was a car parked back, They're mostly hidden from view by the dumpster and a few scraggly bushes. I remember thinking it was weird that he had parked so far away and that he didn't even have a basket of candy or anything. At one point, he started holding my hand. We were maybe halfway across the lot when I saw it a second. Easter bunny stepping out from a car. He was leading me to it first. I just stopped walking. My little brain didn't know what to make of it. I remember looking back and forth between the two of them, completely confused. I hadn't seen that car earlier. And now there were two Easter bunnies. Something about it didn't feel magical anymore. It just felt wrong to this day. I've always thought of what happened next as an act of God. One of the teachers, I think her name was Miss Sabrina, just happened to be walking around the church, maybe heading out to prep for the egg hunt or check on something outside. She looked over at the parking lot right as I was being led over to the car. I'll never forget the sound she made. I've never heard a more terrifying scream in my life. The man in the costume immediately let go of my hand and bolted for the car, and without thinking, I took off running in the opposite direction toward Miss Sabrina. Once I was safe in her arms, I turned my head just in time to catch a glimpse of the car, which was now speeding out of the parking lot. I'm not 100% positive, but I'm pretty sure I saw another kid in the back seat of that car. Miss Sabrina wasn't even looking, but I told her what I had seen, and she took me seriously. The next few hours are a little blurry miss. Sabrina alerted the other adults right away, and police eventually made me tell them what happened. They asked about the kid. I said I saw in the back seat, and I did my best to describe him, even though I had only seen him for like a split second, and I wasn't even sure if my mind was playing tricks on me or not. My parents were the most upset, and for good reason. I think my mom cried for an hour straight. After we went home, the police followed up with the church, but nothing ever came of it. There were no missing children in the area, so the police didn't really have anything to work on. The running theory was that whoever had been in that costume somehow had a key to the back door and just sat in the bathroom, waiting for a kid to use it, and by sheer misfortune, that kid had been me. I still find the whole thing deeply unsettling. Whoever had done that must have been familiar with the church's layout. Otherwise, it wouldn't have known where to park or wait, or even how to get away with it all. But what scares me the most is that I think there really was a kid in the back seat of that car. It's hard for Easter to come and go without me thinking about this experience. This happened on a Friday night a couple months back. My girlfriend's parents had planned a weekend trip out of town. Some kind of anniversary thing, I think. So naturally, my girlfriend Bonnie invited me to stay at her place. Normally, her parents are pretty strict, and sleeping over in her room is definitely off limits. But since they'd be gone the whole weekend, we figured it wouldn't hurt anyone. Bonnie lives in one of those suburban neighborhoods where every house looks the same, quiet enough that by 10 o'clock, it always feels deserted. Honestly, that place creeps me out a little whenever I leave late at night, so I was relieved at the thought of just staying put for once. I showed up around 8, brought snacks, and we watched a movie. The usual stuff. Bonnie's room is on the second floor facing the backyard, and from her window, you can just barely see into the dense line of trees that borders their property. They don't have much exterior lighting, so at night it's pitch black out there, like looking straight into a void. Bonnie has a queen-sized bed, so we both had plenty of space, enough that we could stretch comfortably without crowding each other. I'll skip the rest of the irrelevant stuff. We eventually turned off the TV around midnight and drifted off. I don't remember falling asleep, but I vividly remember the unsettling dream that followed. Now, before I tell you about it, I want to say one thing. I've only had a false awakening dream a couple of times in my life before. This night was one of them. For anyone who's never had one, it's a really strange and almost transcendent experience. Dreams like the one I'm about to describe are actually the main reason I believe there are things in this world beyond those that we can see. In the dream, I woke up abruptly to the unmistakable sound of a door slamming shut somewhere. Downstairs, before I could even process it, rapid footsteps started racing up the stairs. Without hesitation, I shot up in the bed with the intention of intercepting whoever had broken in. But something stopped me. Bonnie's room looked identical to how it had looked when we went to sleep. Every detail exactly as it should have been, except for one thing that I could still picture in my mind's eye even now. Thin yellow glow was spilling into the bedroom from the crack beneath the bedroom door. It was just a sliver of light, but for some reason, I couldn't tear my eyes away from it. All my confidence was gone. My vision began tunneling into this little bar of light as everything else started fading to black. The footsteps made it up the stairs and started storming towards the door, but I couldn't do anything about it. I was frozen, and then silence. I was still fixated on the light below the door when the voices started. At first, it was just one voice, a woman's voice, saying all sorts of nasty things about me. Insults about my appearance, my outlook on life, my future. But then things started getting more personal. It knew things about me, deeply personal things I'd never shared with anyone, not even Bonnie. It started reciting events from my past, things I had said, things I had done, things no stranger would know, things no stranger could know. One voice became two, two became three, and before I knew it, there were 100 voices tormenting me with my darkest, most repressed secrets. It genuinely felt like the darkest pieces of my brain were being dragged out of my head and thrown under a microscope. I couldn't take it anymore. I threw off the covers, bolted across the room, and swung open the bedroom door, ready to confront whoever was harassing me. But the instant the door opened, every light in the house snapped off, and I was plunged into pure darkness. The voices stopped, and the air turned ice cold, sharp enough to sting my skin, and for a split second, it felt like I'd stepped into another world entirely. I stumbled backwards in a disoriented haze until I found the bed, then scrambled under the covers like I was 6 years old again. And then I woke up, only I was still dreaming at that point. I just didn't know it. I sat up slowly, obviously still scared, but trying to reassure myself that the nightmare was over. But to my horror, when I looked at the bedroom door, I saw that same beam of light pouring into the room, and then I heard it, the downstairs door slamming shut again, followed by those same frantic footsteps stomping up the stairs. The entire sequence replayed itself with agonizing precision. The footsteps stopping at the door, the voices, the sequence, the whole thing. I couldn't help myself. I again ran towards the door and threw it open, only to experience that same cold darkness as before. When I finally woke up for real, my heart was racing. I was 75% sure I had actually woken up, but I was so disoriented from the strangeness of that double false awakening dream that I couldn't be sure Bonnie was sound asleep next to me, completely unaware of what I had just been through. That's when I knew I was awake for real. In my dream, I hadn't even thought to look over at the other side of the bed. I started to relax, but when I sat up to look at the bedroom door, I damn near screamed. There under the door was that same strip of light that I had seen in my dreams. It was the exact same image. It didn't make sense. Bonnie and I were alone, and every single light in the house was supposed to be off. For a second, I just stared, unsure of what to make of what I was seeing. But then I heard footsteps downstairs, clear as day. Someone was inside the house. Right away, I knew we were being robbed. Without another thought, I pulled out my phone and discreetly called the police. After telling them what was happening, I tiptoed over to the door just to make sure it was locked. Then I crept back to Bonnie and gently woke her up, putting my hand over her mouth so she wouldn't accidentally make a noise. She didn't scream or anything when I told her, which was a huge relief. It felt like forever, but after a few tense minutes, the police arrived at the house. Things got loud downstairs. The police actually kicked in the front door, and there was a bunch of shouting. when I felt like it was safe to do, so I went downstairs just in time to see two masked men being ushered into a police car in cuffs. I talked to the officers for a bit and thanked them before going back upstairs. It was late, but Bonnie's parents rushed back from their trip early once they heard what had happened. They weren't even mad that I had stayed the night. After hearing my story, they were actually grateful. About a week after that, Bonnie called me with more information. The officers told her parents that the two men who had been arrested admitted to breaking in because they'd seen a Facebook post about their trip and didn't think anyone would be home. As odd as it sounds, thinking about the actual break-in doesn't bother me all that much. The reason I can't get this experience out of my head is because of that damn dream. I can accept that the noise of the break-ins made its way into my head somehow. That part's fine. But what I don't understand is the actual content of the dream. Bonnie thinks I have some unresolved demons lurking somewhere in my subconscious, but I don't like thinking about that possibility. And as for the door, I was lying down, so I wouldn't have been able to even see the door, let alone conjure up a perfect image of it in my head. I really don't know what to make of that, but that strip of light is something I see all the time. I can literally see it in my head now. I don't even have to be closing my eyes, which is even more troubling. It's not like it's obstructing my vision or anything, but it's always there in the back of my mind. I'm sure that image will go away eventually, but part of me is worried that it'll be seared into my head forever. I'm going to keep this as short as possible. Most nights I fall asleep to some form of sound. It's the best way I know how to knock out quickly. Sometimes it's a chess video. Sometimes it's a podcast about space. Sometimes it's just a recording of a thunderstorm. You get the idea. I'm a very active dreamer, so whatever I fall asleep to usually gets translated directly into my dreams in some form. For example, if I fall asleep to a soccer compilation, then it's likely I'll have a dream about playing soccer. Part of the reason this is so clutch is because I had a ton of nightmares growing up, and this technique prevents them. This happened a couple of weeks ago during a sleepover at my friend Duncan's place. It was a sleepover, so I had to fall asleep normally. That wasn't an issue for me. It just meant my dreams would be a lot less predictable. There were three of us. Me, Duncan, and Ian. Duncan's parents were away for the weekend, which is why we were having the sleepover in the first place. He has a lot of big comfy couches in his living room, so that's where we all slept. That night, I had one of the most vivid dreams I've had in a while. I was out at sea on this small sailboat. I don't even know where it came from. I've never been on a sailboat in my life. The water was super choppy, and I remember the sky being this weird mix of dark purple and gray. The wind was howling, but not in a scary way. It kind of felt like I was in a movie or something. Then the boat lurched. I couldn't see what we hit, but I definitely felt it. Whatever it was, it knocked the whole sail sideways and cracked something underneath water, started gushing in through the bottom, and I remember trying to plug the hole with my jacket, which obviously wasn't doing anything. I started panicking, like full-on helpless panic. And just as the boat started to sink, a dolphin jumped out of the water, locked eyes with me, and said in perfect English, "Wake up." That instantly snapped me awake. I'm usually pretty groggy after waking up, but this was different, although I didn't know why yet. I looked around the room trying to figure out if anything was different or strange, but everything looked normal. My friends were sleeping next to me, and the living room was exactly how we left it. You know that weird in-between phase right after you wake up, where you can't really process information accurately? That's what I was experiencing a few seconds later, though my brain started functioning properly, and I picked up on a sound that was definitely out of place. There was this distinct rushing sound coming from somewhere upstairs. It wasn't muffled, like you'd expect if a faucet was just dripping. It was consistent like a hose or something. It must have been why I had that wonky dream about the ocean. I sat there for a second, trying to figure out what I was hearing. Then, like an idiot, I got up to check it out myself. I crept up the stairs, trying to make as little noise as possible. The noise got louder with each step. It was definitely running water, and it was coming from the upstairs bathroom at the end of the hallway. The door was slightly cracked open and even. From a distance, I could see the sink. One of the knobs was turned all the way to the right. The water was just gushing out full blast. There was no way that could have happened on its own. It didn't even make sense. I got close to the doorway and was about to step in, but something made me stop. The bathroom up there is pretty big. It's got this long counter and a bathtub with a curtain, plus this awkward corner where the toilet is. Plenty of blind spots. For all I knew, someone could have been crouching behind the tub or standing right behind the door. My stomach dropped. I don't know why, but I just couldn't go in. I backed up and booked it down the stairs to wake up Duncan. I shook him hard and told him something was wrong. At first, he was groggy, but the urgency in my voice must have gotten through because he sat up and asked what was going on. I told him the sink upstairs was blasting, and I thought someone was in the house. That woke him up real fast. We left Ian asleep on the couch and crept back up together. When we got to the bathroom door, Duncan didn't even hesitate. He pushed it open and stepped inside. I was not prepared for what was about to happen. Almost immediately, a figure launched from around the corner and tackled Duncan from the side. It happened so fast, all I saw was Duncan go down, and this guy swinging a piece of PVC pipe like he was about to beat the crap out of him. I didn't think. I just threw myself at the guy, trying to get him off Duncan. We both piled on him and wrestled him to the floor, but he was bigger than both of us. It was pure chaos. Eventually, the guy broke free and bailed, shoving both of us to the side and sprinting for the stairs. By the time Duncan and I made it to the porch, he was gone. The police showed up maybe 30 minutes later, but they weren't much help. They determined that the entry point was a downstairs window, which was wide open and had been previously unlocked. Duncan's family doesn't have cameras in their house, so there was no evidence we could turn over. The police said that it was likely that it had just been a burglar committing a random attack, but my friends and Juan, I think it was way more specific than that. First of all, why would a burglar purposely make noise by turning on a sink faucet in the first place? Yeah, it was obviously a trap to lure someone upstairs. But what was the point if he was trying to rob the Placitas? Makes me think he had a more sinister intention, one I can't fully explain. Duncan is convinced that whoever broke in knew his parents were out of town and had expected only one person to be there that night, him. If that's true, then I can only imagine that whoever had broken intended on seriously injuring or killing Duncan. I don't even like to think about what would have happened had I gone in that upstairs bathroom by myself. The crisp autumn breeze drifted through the air. It finally felt like fall, my favorite time of year. It was also the first fall that my boyfriend Carter and I were spending together in our new home. I had this cute idea to surprise him. Decorate the house with fall and Halloween stuff before he got home from work. I hit up a few nearby stores, Marshalls, some local spots, and even browsed online. That's when I stumbled upon a listing on Facebook Marketplace that really caught my eye. A large green storage container filled to the brim with fall decorations, all for just $20. The ad said, "Everything must go," and at the bottom, "Clearing out house, check my profile for more." So I did. The seller's name was Cody. His profile was almost entirely private, with a blurry photo of a lake as the cover, and a profile picture of a guy in a gray trucker cap, his face hidden by the brim. A little strange, but not unheard of. His other listings were odd. A supposedly new iPhone for $700, some women's clothes, Christmas decorations. A strange mix, but I wasn't buying those, just the decorations. I messaged him. He replied instantly. He said the container had everything: tableware, outdoor decorations, you name it. I told him I could swing by today, and he said he'd be home around 9 p.m. after work. He sent me the address. I Googled it. The house looked pretty normal from street view, well-kept lawn, 2 cars in the driveway. The town wasn't exactly great, but I figured whatever. Still, I brought my friend Sally with me, just to be safe. It was a half-hour drive. We chatted along the way, but as we entered the town, Sally started joking about how sketchy everything felt. She was half joking, but I could tell she wasn't completely kidding. As we got closer, my phone lit up. It was a message from Cody. "When you get here, you can just come right in." Sally and I looked at each other. Weird. We pulled up to the house. No cars in the driveway. Dim lights glowed behind tightly shut blinds. I messaged back, "We're here, can you come to the front?" We watched the house. Then, at the same moment, we both saw it. One of the blinds moved, just a sliver, like someone was watching us through it. Then snap, it closed again. Seconds later, the front door creaked open. A message popped up. "I'm at the door. You can come in." We got out cautiously. I called out, "Cody?" No answer. Again, "Cody?" Nothing. Sally whispered, "We should go." I agreed. I turned and said louder, "Cody?" No reply. We started backing away toward the car when suddenly a man's voice called out, "Hey, yeah, I'm here, inside." We turned. A man was peeking out from the doorway, only half his body showing. He waved us in. Cautiously, we stepped forward. As we got closer, he fully opened the door, then disappeared out of sight inside. We stepped into the house and were hit by a thick, sickly sweet scent, like an old cotton air freshener mixed with something foul, rotten. We heard footsteps, heavy, quick, followed by the man's deep, gravelly voice. "It's over here. Come on in." Sally and I stuck close together. We stepped into the living room. It was dimly lit. Dusty, pinkish red carpet. Old furniture. But that smell, it hit us hard. Like something had died. In the center of the room was a red container with a green lid. Cody stood beside it. This was the first time I really got a good look at him. He looked off. His expression was blank, but there was something unnerving in his eyes. He motioned to the container. "Go ahead. Open it." But this wasn't the same container from the ad. Not even close. I hesitated. "Why don't you open it?" I asked. He smiled slightly. "Well, you're no fun." That was enough. We both started inching back toward the door. Then he opened the container, and that smell, whatever it was, 10 times worse. We didn't wait. We bolted. I didn't even look back until we were in the car. The front door was already closed. Once we were on the road, I told Carter everything, showed him the messages, gave him the address. He promised he wouldn't go there the next day. He came home later than usual. He had gone. But instead of Cody, an older woman had answered the door. She said she lived there alone. Carter checked the property records. Sure enough, the owner was a woman in her late 60s. So who was Cody? I still don't know. But I do know this. I'll never again meet up with someone alone from Facebook Marketplace. Not after that.